Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Lackritz, and I'm a manager at the California Public Utilities Commission. This is another of our ongoing BEAD webinars. We will start in a few more minutes. Until that time, I will be muting myself and turning off my video, but we look forward to chatting with you in a few more minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Jonathan Lackritz at the California Public Utilities Commission. Thank you for joining us for our 7th webinar in a series of webinars about the BEAD programmatic requirements. I will provide a little bit of an intro, go over some of the housekeeping, and then turn over to Ziggy, from our colleague from CTC, to go over the main body of the presentation. Next slide, please. The agenda. So Today we're going to cover, more accurate, Ziggy's going to cover a number of topics, including Build America, Buy America requirements, or BABA as it's known as, low-cost and middle-class affordable service offerings, minimum threshold of high needs areas, environmental historic preservation requirements, labor reporting requirements, tribal consent, other reporting requirements, and then we'll come back for some next steps. As a reminder, we're having webinars on Tuesdays and office hours on Thursdays. Now for some housekeeping matters. So for those of you who have not participated before, please keep an eye on the chat. In that space, we will be sending out useful links to participants in the webinar. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A or email them to us at bgrant@cpuc.ca.gov. We will be not able to answer questions during today's webinar, but we will be building our FAQ to address frequently asked questions. Finally, you may want to turn on closed captions if you want to. On the screen, it shows you there's a button that has a CC in it. That's for closed captions. And also for the best viewing experience, you may want to select side-by-side speaker mode to make sure that you can see both the slides and the speaker. With that, now I'll turn it over to Ziggy Rivkin-Fish from CTC Technology and Energy, our partner in the BEAD planning process, who will present the content portion of this webinar. Thank you, Ziggy.
Thank you, Jonathan. So let's dive right into it, and we'll start with Build America, Buy America. Build America and Buy America Act is a procurement framework for materials for infrastructure projects that are funded by federal funds. They are typically federal funding programs require that infrastructure investments use material and labor sourced from the U.S. to the extent possible. And BEAD is one of those grant-funded projects that must comply with BABA. Now, federal agencies can issue waivers for parts of BABA. And indeed, NTA has executed a limited waiver. And as you can imagine, this is, they took a practical approach and looked at where there are major bottlenecks where it would be a hardship to source certain types of materials from the US, and that's what this limited waiver is about. So there are some components that can be made overseas, non-optic glass inputs, fiber optic connectors, certain electronics, passive optical equipment, and semiconductors. Other materials, including construction materials, need to be produced in the US. Many manufacturers have already self-certified that they comply with BABA, and we'll go over this later, but you will essentially provide, you will get that letters certifying compliance, and you can then forward that letter on when you do reporting on your procurements. Next one. So for the purposes of the application itself, you'll simply be certifying at this point that you will comply with BABA. And then once you're awarded, you'll look to see which manufacturers are compliant with BABA and have self-certified, and which you may need to go around and find alternatives to. You will also be asked during the reporting cycles to report on your procurements and materials, and that requires that letter I mentioned, and some details on the electronics and other things that you're going to be procuring that have international sourcing. All right, so next topic, low cost and middle class affordable service offerings. Next slide. So first, the low-cost service offering. CPUC will require that all applicants and prospective subgrantees certify that they will offer a low-cost program. They must have one without exception to qualified subscribers. So the benchmark that CPUC has set is it needs to cost $30 per month or less, $75 for tribal lands. They must, in terms of qualification, must be available to households with income equal to or below 200% of federal poverty line, or the same types of eligibility requirements that you probably are familiar with from the Affordable Connectivity Program, and that includes SNAP or other participation in other federal programs. This service offering has to meet the performance requirements of BEAD, so you already need to do that with all locations that you're going to connect and provide service to. So this hopefully should not be a surprise to you. And as with BEAD performance, it needs to deliver a latency of no more than 100 milliseconds. No data cap surcharges or throttling, and no extra fees for installation of setups, and then also a free modem or router. In other words, this definition will avoid any surprise fees to the subscriber and can be easily compared. Next. So for those who are not able to deliver a $30 option, there is a allowable modification that so you can propose to have a higher price tag up to $50, but you need to provide justification for it, and we'll be looking for two pieces of information. What are your per subscriber costs that would justify this and show that otherwise your project would be financially unsustainable, or the impact of what a $30 or less cost would have on your ARPU, project revenue, or other aspects, similar aspects, given what you project to be your take rate for subscribers. The modification to this low cost plan, just like the unmodified one, you'll certify that you'll participate in any successor programs to ACP. As you know, ACP is no longer funded, but if it gets renewed in the future, you would make this low-cost program available to participation in ACP or the successor program. Next. We also have another requirement, middle-class affordable service offering. This is unlike the low-income service offering. This one has to be available to everybody, not to simply qualified families. And the threshold cost benchmark established by CPUC is $84 per month or less. Again, that, like the low cost, it would be inclusive of all taxes, fees, and other costs. It also needs to be able to meet minimum performance standards and that we defined earlier and not be subject to data caps and surcharges and throttling. Next. There is a possibility for a waiver if you cannot meet the $84 benchmark. And if you choose to execute or apply for a waiver, there are various pieces of information that you would need to provide as justification that we will review. The price, how long this service offering will be available, and why it would be infeasible. And we have some proposed considerations for your justification that you can include if you have others, even stronger justification for this. We'll, of course, review that as well. Next. One of the requirements of the BEAD grant is that you'll reach out to prospective subscribers in your project area. So we'll ask you to explain how you're going to, what's your strategy for doing that. And this is something that I hope all of you had planned anyway. Why not advertise your services and tell everybody that you're coming? So all we're requiring is that you talk about how you're going to do that and how it's going to serve your area, at the inhabitants in your area. Next. Next slide. So you may be familiar with low income areas and disadvantaged community areas from other California grant programs. And there is a requirement to include a certain threshold of project area units when you design your project area. These are these are distressed areas economically, and there are a variety of different definitions of these. We have not yet established and codified what percentage that threshold will be. That will be coming later, but there will be a ability to receive a waiver if you have allowable circumstances that require it. And again, we'll detail the particulars at a future webinar. Next. So here are some of the definition of the high need areas, the disadvantaged community. And by the way, these will be available. You don't have to calculate any of this yourself or do complex lookups to figure out which PAUs fall into these categories. That's something that will be made available during the application stage. So when you're consulting your map, these PAUs will be indicated. So for a disadvantaged community, the definition is census tract receiving the highest 25% of overall scores in a particular tool called CalEnviro Screen. There are references in this slide to where you can find particulars on that. And then lacking overall scores due to data cap, but receiving the highest 5% cumulative pollution burden scores. Again, this is going into a lot of weeds, but the important thing to note here is that lands under the control of federally recognized tribes automatically gets categorized as disadvantaged community areas. Low income area is defined a little different, and it's pegged against household income. So those areas with household incomes less than 80% of state median income um, is typically designated as a low income area. Next. So now we're getting into environmental and historic preservation reviews. NEPA stands for National Environmental Policy Act. That, together with the National Historic Preservation Act, constitute a framework for review of projects that are funded by federal grants or are to be conducted on federal lands. So what these frameworks do is basically say, stop, look, listen before you make decisions that can affect the environment. And so the review is a formal review that consists of consultation with certain agencies such as U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the State Historical Preservation Office. And these reviews are required to be conducted before construction can begin. So next. So what a NEPA review entails is an analysis of what's the effect of your construction activities, so your broadband infrastructure project. And it also involves, like I said, early consideration of the effect. So and completion as early as possible. And one of the reasons for doing that, besides being able to put a spade in the ground and starting construction, is that funding, there's a limit to how much funding can be dispersed and what it can be dispersed against until you clear this hurdle. But you will not be left alone in this. We have a variety of different tools to help you, and there is thankfully a framework that NTA has adopted to streamline the process. Next. So I will just briefly, this is for your own reading. I will talk a little bit about what categorical exclusions are. Environmental assessments are formal assessments of a project if that may be necessary if there is a finding that the project potentially could have significant impact. And then a more in-depth study is called an environmental impact statement. These are pretty rare for broadband projects, but I'll get to that in a second. But what you would note here is the timelines involved that you may want to take a look at. Next. And so here's the categorical exclusions. These are much faster than any of the other processes that I just mentioned. What they are is a set of standard actions, categories of actions that have been studied and found to, under normal circumstances, not have major impact. And as you can imagine, that covers just about most, if not all, regular activities of broadband infrastructure deployment. So in order to figure out if the project qualifies for categorical exclusions, we will need some more details if you get awarded. And that means more detailed project descriptions, maps, species lists, depths of excavations, and various other things. And I'll get to where you can find some of this information if you need to do that. And then there is one more thing to note here. If there is even one aspect of your project that means the project cannot qualify for categorical exclusions across the board, it does kick in a somewhat longer process to assess impact. So this is definitely something to review. And again, there's a mapping tool that we'll talk a little bit more about that will help you assess these things, including potentially doing small alterations and route changes in order to ensure that categorical exclusions apply and you can fast track your project. Next. Separate from the NEPA review is the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106. We often abbreviate it as a Section 106 review. This means looking at historical and or cultural properties or sensitive areas, and it typically requires consultations with the State Historical Preservation Office or Tribal Historical Preservation Office, and if they don't have that, Native American tribes, and in some cases, depending on the boundaries of your project, it may be all of them. One thing to note here is that the categorical exclusions are separate from Section 106. This is a parallel and a little different process. Categorical exclusions are very helpful in the sense that if you can show that your project does qualify for categorical exclusions in whole, then chances are that the impact on historical and cultural properties are diminished as well. But it doesn't exclude this consultation process. Next. For specifically for Section 106, there are some things to consider. You looking at the project that you are going to propose, if that project is in an area that already has undergone a previous study, then that might actually help get things approved very quickly. So this is one of the first reviews, is to see if something has already been done, and maybe a previous broadband project that has gone through a review. If that's done, then obviously consult that and include that, and that would help streamline the review quite a lot. There are also the other question is, what is your construction methodology? Are you putting if you're going, for example, on Native American land, and you're not digging into the ground, but putting your fiber on utility poles, it obviously will have a different potential impact than breaking ground in areas that may be undisturbed. So the construction methodologies here matter, as well as does the depth of the digging, for example. In addition to sort of reviewing whether there has been other studies done before that you can leverage, the other tool you'll be using is GIS analysis of known resources. And again, there are resources available for this, but one of the chief ones that you may consult is NTIA's own tool. Next. And here's the the tool, they call it a permitting resource because it is broader than just the environmental aspects. They have various different layers in addition to um, floodplains and various other things that are relevant to either climate or to permits and environmental assessments. There are also information on federal, tribal, and lands and parks and protected areas um, that that help you get a sense of what's involved in your project area and where are there risks. And there's also layers that have nothing to do with the environmental assessment and have to do with right-of-way ownership and is more relevant to permitting activities throughout your project. Next. So in terms of the requirements at the application stage, we'll be asking you to certify that you don't have a history of non-compliance with the EHP requirements and that you fully intend to comply with EHP requirements. If you have not, if there has been violations, you'll have to provide a detailed narrative and documentation and explain why and how you were able to remedy it. We'll also ask for proposed timelines for the time required to get the permits and environmental approvals, and that includes CEQA approvals. That's the state equivalent to NEPA. And we'll ask for a narrative description of the processes that you are going to undertake to ensure compliance with federal and California laws. Next. After, if you get selected and awarded a project or more than one, there are certain requirements that will kick in after the selection. And as I mentioned earlier, there are some additional project information that will be required by NTA that we'll ask for. And you'll have to, of course, collaborate with us to provide the information necessary that will then be submitted to NTIA, and subject to their approval and green light, get the thumbs up to start on construction activities. We can help to see if you qualify for categorical exclusion. And this is hopefully going to be a partnership. So as we are all eager to make sure that these projects get executed and subscribers can be added. You will, of course, agree to obtain all necessary federal, state, and local government permits and approvals, and that includes the environmental aspects of these permits and approvals. Next. During a deployment, you'll comply with the federal and state laws and requirements, and also comply with measures that are specific to your sub-grant agreement, if there are any. And one of the things that I should add here that you have to agree to as part of that compliance is that even if you have received a go-ahead and you've cleared environmental and historical preservation requirements and a finding of no significant impact, that's a ruling of likely no significant impact. So if you stumble across a Native American burial site or something like that, you have to stop and we'll have to assess what uh, the impact might be, and there will and other consultations may be necessary and documentation or mitigations that will then be submitted to NTIA as well, and then you can continue with the project after another green light. But there's kind of a stop that happens if you run across unanticipated um, sensitive areas. Next, next slide. So there are some labor reporting requirements. These are requirements that you'll submit. These are requirements for reporting that you'll submit as a subgrantee. So some of these questions also appear in the application, and some of these are part of regular reporting as things may change in your subcontracting arrangements. So part of what you'll be reporting is whether your workforce will be directly employed or subcontracted or a mix. Who are the entities that you are subcontracting with, if applicable, and job titles and numbers of staff of the workforce, and then a description of wages, wage scales, and any in-house training or apprenticeship programs as well. Next. You will, subgrantees, when selected, will certify compliance with Davis-Bacon Prevailing Wages Act, and there we have a website you can consult as well. The if you have you'll also be asked to certify that you will use a unionized project workforce, or that if as an alternative, if you cannot certify that you'll use a unionized project workforce, which simplifies the reporting requirements. There are some additional project workforce details that you'll need to provide as well, and you'll need to provide a project workforce continuity plan. So that's on the next slide. So what is this workforce continuity plan? And again, you don't need it if you are planning to use a unionized workforce. What are the steps that you are going to take to make sure that you have access to appropriately skilled labor, and that it'll be done in a timely manner and competent? What are the registered apprenticeships or partnership training programs, et cetera, that you're going to be using, and any partnerships that you have with unions, community colleges, or community-based groups for such training. Also, what are the steps you have taken in the past and continue to take or will take to minimize risk of labor disputes and disruptions, including safety, that could jeopardize timelines. Next. We'll also, as I mentioned, one of the things we'll ask about is what's your safety plan as part of the workforce continuity plan, and any OSHA 10, OSHA 30 licensures or training that you're going to conduct, and what specific measures you're going to be taking to ensure safety in your project. And this also, we've mentioned this before, but who are the entities that you're going to be subcontracting with if you are working with a subcontractor. Um, and and then finally making sure that workers are receiving wages and benefits in a timely manner, and that they are and they are the wage scale appropriate to ensure that you have sufficient labor force availability. Next. Next slide. So for tribal consent, if you are proposing to a project that is partially or wholly on uh, tribal land, and this is tribal land that is recognized as such federally, you will need a resolution of consent. This is basically a formal uh, agreement uh, to allow you to construct on those tribal lands. The CPUC that we strongly encourage you to get this kind of consent prior to the application process, but we may consider application if you have evidence of engagement, meaningful engagement with the tribal government. And we can see that you're on your way to essentially get that tribal consent. Or there is an agreement, for example, that they will provide consent upon award. So you have kind of the free consent agreement in place. Yeah, let's skip the last. By all means, please read. There's some additional information, but I know we're running a little short on time, and I want to be able to cover everything. Next slide. So, other reporting requirements. This is whatever we couldn't fit into some of these other categories. So you will be required to submit reports on a regular basis to CPUC, at least semi-annually, for the duration of the subgrant. And this, in turn, will be provided to NTIA. And as part of that, there may be some additional reporting requirements that are not currently listed that may be added. And also, there may be an increase in the frequency of reporting that will be needed. And this is a standard operating procedure. For example, if your project for some reason is deemed at risk, you've missed milestones, and there's a need, therefore, to get a more detailed insight into your progress, and therefore the reporting may be more frequent. Next. There are several different reporting categories that you'll be included. This is a summary. There are slides that come right after this that give more detail on each. The first reporting category is the general project description and location information. That is something that typically you have at the beginning of the project and doesn't change much. Ideally, it doesn't change at all, but you never know with BSLs. As you construct, you may run across some that turn out to be sheds or non-buildings, etc. And so the type and location of BSLs may change a little bit in each reporting cycle. And then what are the facilities and services that are going to be delivered if you're constructing buildings to support your project? Then you'll be reporting on which communications huts or other things you have constructed, or towers, etc. Internet connection agreement, if you are using assets of third parties and you need the services or the assets of that third party to deliver services. So in those cases, like, what's the status of your agreement with that entity? And then we'll also be asking for performance test results. Then service offering and subscriber information, which plans are you going to offer, the number of activated subscribers. Ideally, offered plans will not change throughout the project, but certainly the number of activated subscribers will be as you get locations connected. There'll also be some GIS data and financial reporting that will be necessary. Some of you will be familiar with SF425. This is a standard federal financial report, and you may have encountered in other federal grant programs. Contracts and jobs, we've mentioned a few already, but there's also, in addition to the subcontracts that we would need information on. And again, these are all sort of spelled out, and they're required by NTIA, who will have a standard format for this. But part of what we'll also need are minority or women-owned businesses and jobs created or retained. And then finally, as we have gone over earlier, the Build America, Buy America provisions. So we'll need to know, as part of this reporting, what was purchased from international manufacturers that had a waiver, and for others, what are, and also the certification letters themselves that show compliance or self-certification for BABA compliance. Next, I can, so these are more details on this, the question on the categories already summarized. So please read these at your leisure. I'm not going to go over them. You're probably going to fall asleep if I do. So why don't we move ahead? I think actually this is the last section. So I think we go into next steps after this. Okay. Back to Jonathan.
Hi, Ziggy. Thank you very much. We will be having additional webinars where we will be going into more detail about the subgrantee reporting requirements, and NTIA is still may still be issuing further guidance on that. So this is the latter part of the presentation, is to sort of make potential applicants aware of the overall framework that the reporting will be occurring in. And as we roll out our grants management solution, we'll be also hosting webinars that will walk through how to use that solution to provide the required reporting under the BEAD program. Next slide, please. So we are going to be taking a short break in our outreach engagements next week, as our staff will be attending both the State Broadband Leaders Network, which is a national twice-a-year gathering NTIA has of state staff working on broadband, and also some other activities. So there'll be no webinars or office hours next week. That's the week of February 3rd through the 7th. We will have our office hours this Thursday, and then we'll be resuming them the following week. Please visit our website to make sure that you have the latest information. We're also going to be updating sort of the events webpage with registration links, As additional events or webinars are confirmed, we had originally planned on 10 webinars. We've now done 7 of them, so we have about 3 more to go, but I imagine we'll be adding additional webinars based upon the questions we've been receiving. In the meantime, you can feel free to email us questions at beadgrant@cpuc.ca.gov. That's all one word. It's in the chat there. Thank you. And that's also up here on the screen. And with that, next slide, please. Encourage you to go to our website. We have a number of pages there. We'll be updating content regularly on them. And please that's where you can find the most up-to-date information about California's implementation of the BEAD program. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and we will see you all in approximately 2 weeks. Thank you very much.